So my presentation today is structured as follows. I will first introduce the context of my research, the Sundarbans, as Cornelia already mentioned, and my argument. Then I will go into some details as to the evidence I collected to substantiate such argument. And finally, I will return to the argument itself and expand on it to draw preliminary implications for theory, policy, and practice. Just wanted to mention that the content of this presentation today can be found more extensively articulated in a recent article I published on the Energy Research and Social Science Journal, for those of you who are interested in learning more. And I would also like to clarify that this research is based on primary data collected between January 2019 and March 2020, using a range of methods, but mainly through ethnographic fieldwork. Obviously, Cornelia already mentioned that I am a social anthropologist, so ethnographic fieldwork is our key method of inquiry. So this is a rooftop-mounted solar energy system gathering dust, as you can obviously see, on a building in Gangasagar, a village on Sagar Island. Since the 1990s, Sagar Island, among other islands in India's Sundarbans, has seen much investment made to expand people's access to electricity. For those of you who are not familiar with the Indian subcontinent, the Sundarbans, which you can see depicted here, are a region divided between India and Bangladesh that is renowned for its biodiversity, as well as for its being at the forefront of climate change. And as you can see here, the region comprises the Sundarbans National Park, which is highlighted in green color. The Sundarbans is also a region densely populated, inhabited by roughly 4 million people, mostly living in conditions that we would describe of poverty and deprivation. So in the Sundarbans, a range of agencies have, over the last 3 decades, implemented all sorts of energy projects, leading to the realization of solar home systems, solar mini-grids, wind turbines, biomass gasification plants, and then more recently, the national grid. Indeed, most areas of the Sundarbans were not connected to the national grid until 2017 and have since then been electrified. However, implementing agencies have often stopped at installation. In their narrow understanding of sustainability as a property of things, so a solar home system is sustainable just because it is powered by solar energy, these agencies have mostly taken quantitative targets, say the number of households connected to solar mini-grids or the quantity of kilowatt hour generated by a wind turbine. So they've taken these quantitative targets as being sufficient to demonstrate that their projects, their energy projects, actively contribute towards sustainable energy objectives. They have not, in other words, made appropriate arrangements for the upkeep of the energy systems they realized, leaving these systems behind, essentially, in the care or lack of care of the local communities, or more specifically, certain people within those communities. This is what such narrow understanding of sustainability produces. Discounted as inconsequential to the success of energy projects, everyday operations and maintenance have failed in most cases to keep energy systems alive. This used to be a solar power plant, which obviously is no more. Just to give you a sense of proportions, out of 19 renewable energy projects that I surveyed in India's Sundarbans, only 4 were still working by March 2020 when I left the field. Not that this situation is unique to the Sundarbans. Just the other day, as I was looking out of the window from the upper deck of a 2-story bus in London, I saw an array of solar panels mounted on the roof of a bus shelter. In an ideal world, this vision could have enticed me to imagine a beautiful low-carbon energy future for the city of London, was it not for the fact that the panels were covered by a thick layer of dust and that water was stagnating on one of the panels, which was surfaced and slightly curved inwards. So my argument is simple. I understand the work it takes to operate and maintain energy systems as care work. As other forms of care work, such as cleaning, cooking, teaching, nursing, operations and maintenance are key to the reproduction of energy systems past the original moments of design and production. So energy systems are produced today are brought into the world by the ingenuity of designers and engineers, but for them to really stick around, for them to fulfill their purpose, they need to be reproduced on a daily basis. And that happens through the work of operations and maintenance. Operations and maintenance are therefore extremely important for any energy system to last. In other words, for any energy system to be sustained in the long term. This is my understanding of sustainability, which really hinges on the possibility of care work to be continuously infusing vitality into energy systems. That, in turn, however, hinges on care work to be valued, because care work cannot be sustained unless it is valued. Unfortunately, as we have learned from decades of feminist scholarship, and as we have seen after years of strikes in this country by teachers, cleaners, healthcare workers, care work is often devalued. So coming back to my argument, the devaluation of operations and maintenance, their discounting as inconsequential to the success of energy projects, has real sustainability implications, as we have seen, but also social justice implications, because as feminist scholars have taught us, care workers' identities are often implicated in the discounting of their work as involving less than it takes. So let's move on to consider the specifics of my case study so that we can return on this argument with better insights. The evidence I would like to present relates to a set of 5 DC solar mini-grids, one of which you can see depicted here, implemented by a wildlife conservation organization, which I will call the NGO. On an island of the Sundarbans, not Sagar Island, which I mentioned earlier. The NGO had the ambitious target of connecting 1,000 families in the Sundarbans to solar mini-grids, and set off to achieve this target by focusing on building a number of such mini-grids. So funding was raised by the NGO for covering the costs of project development, hardware procurement, and construction, so everything that pertains to installation. But no budget was set aside for the activities that take place in the aftermath of all that. Instead, the solution the NGO came up with for the long-term operations and maintenance of the solar mini-grids was to determine a fee of 50 rupees, which correspond to roughly 50 pence, which was said to be the monthly price households would have to pay for energy services. The figure of a system operator, who you can see depicted here doing his work, was recruited from within the community, but not paid by the NGO. So this figure was institutionalized with a double function. On the one side, he was to collect the fee, and on the other, he was to operate and maintain the DC mini-grid. So there were 5 system operators, 1 each mini-grid. The monthly fee of 50 rupees was therefore doubly earmarked. It was at once the price users would have to pay for energy services, as well as their contribution towards the operator's labor costs. Assuming that whole households would pay the 50 rupees fee, the operator's monthly income was set to be 3,000 to 5,000 Indian rupees, which corresponds to 30-50 pounds per month. This is on the lower end of the monthly income of 50 up to 50 pounds up to 100 pounds an average household makes in the Sundarbans. So the first issue here with this type of arrangement is one of poor remuneration. The operator's monthly income was limited by design and made dependent on users' willingness to pay. While the NGO could have made budgetary provisions for operations and maintenance, they preferred to devolve the responsibility for the operator's payment to the community. Let's look at what the system operator's job entailed in more detail. As one would expect, operating and maintaining the solar mini-grids require the operators to maintain the power generation unit in optimal conditions, keeping the solar PV modules clean and preventing vegetation growth, as we can see the operator is doing here. Verify the workings of the distribution system, so the power distribution lines, repair technical faults and replace defective materials where necessary. The operator would also go from house to house and check the status of the connection, sharing best practices for appliance operation and energy storage management. The job also required the operators to collect the users' monthly fees and reporting them, as we can see here, attending meetings with NGO staff, as well as welcome the occasional visitors to the site of the power generation units. Yet, most importantly, although invisibly, the system operator's job consisted of bridging a gap between demand and supply. On the one side, the NGO, being a wildlife conservation organization, was not keen on seeing human activities excessively expand in such close proximity to the Sundarbans National Park. And so they kept energy supply within a certain limit, which was prescribed by design. This limit, however, was well below the expectations users had for the mini-grids. After a lifetime of deprivations, people on the island were keen on electricity introducing some comfort in their lives. And so the operator's work mostly consisted of bridging this gap between energy demand and supply, which is really a gap between two differing worldviews, that of the NGO and that of the users on the other side. So in practice, the operator's work entailed, therefore, a great deal of convincing people to give up their expectations and comply with the NGO's prescriptions. This meant imparting instructions, even reproaching users if they were found not to use the system correctly. In other words, according to the technical specifications. At the same time, when able to do so, the operator himself would alter those specifications to make the system better able to accommodate users' expectations. So he would recommend low wattage appliances that, even if not included in the original design, could be run without causing too many issues. He would lobby with the NGO for a greater current output. He would even offer discounts on the monthly fee to the users as a way to show sympathy for their poor financial conditions, obviously at his own expense, since the fee was aimed to cover his labor costs. Most importantly, the operator would offer his moral support to frustrated users, hear them out, provide reassurance. In other words, his work was all-encompassing, entailing technical expertise as well as social skills and a great degree of emotional labor. And I find this picture to be nice in the sense that it really encapsulates the range of activities that the operators were doing on the island. The operator here is depicted on the right-hand side and the user is on the left-hand side. And obviously there is just so much more here going on than just fixing technical problems with the system. So this is a huge amount of work. The operator's work was a huge amount of work, taking most of the operator's time, especially if one considers the little remuneration of the job. And so the broader issue here is one of misrecognition as to what the system operator's job actually entails, what its purpose really is. At some point during my fieldwork, several components were damaged by lightning, resulting in a number of households becoming disconnected from power supply. A technology of foreign import, those components were not easy to procure locally. Priced at £30, moreover, their procurement was well beyond the means of most people. For, as I said, an average household can count on a monthly income of £50, roughly. Therefore, the system operators obviously looked to the NGO for the replacement of the damaged items. Yet the NGO, wanting to remove themselves from local dynamics to realize new projects in new locations, because this is where supposedly the impact lies in numbers. So the NGO deployed the language of self-sufficiency, energy autonomy, community ownership, to argue that it was on the community to take responsibility for the asset, as referred to the DC mini grids, they now owned, completely disregarding the fact that this was a marginalized community lacking the means to be fully autonomous. So there were other issues with how this particular energy system, energy project were realized, but for the sake of brevity, I will stop here and return now to my argument, drawing preliminary conclusions from this specific case study. So one could be tempted to attribute system operators' experience of devaluation and misrecognition to economic considerations or technical miscalculations. Operations and maintenance are certainly expensive and for remote areas such as the Sundarbans, logistically difficult to arrange. Cutting on such costs ostensibly allows implementing agencies to realize other additional systems, therefore maximizing impact by reaching ambitious quantitative targets. 1,000 households connected to solar power or 1 megawatt of solar installed in the Sundarbans. Yet, the perspective I take seeks to advance an alternative explanation to account for the devaluation of the operator's work. I suggest that the mechanisms by which operations and maintenance work comes to be devalued can be better understood if read through the lens of care work. Indeed, the system operator's work, being about attending to users' needs, as we have seen here, but also in this picture, qualifies as care work. So care work entails all those activities that go into those daily activities that sustain things, sustain people, and support the maintenance of the material world we live in. Feminist scholars already lamented that care work pays less than other kinds of work, a fact not unrelated to the identity of both those who do the caring and those who are cared for. In this context, it is young men structurally disadvantaged by both caste and class who do the job of operating and maintaining DC solar mini grids for people living in the margins of the Indian state. While on the other side, the staff of the NGO and implementing agencies more generally usually come from a middle-class background and are highly educated, so have the right educational credentials. What are the implications of reading operations and maintenance in terms of care work? Why does it matter? Coming back to the title of this talk, why should we care about care? What does it tell us? Saying that operations and maintenance is a form of care work allows us to trace the continuities between this particular incident and other forms of devaluation and misrecognition, and in that it points to the bigger structures that confine certain types of work and certain kinds of people to the margins. as people who have little to contribute to sustainable energy objectives, for example. One of the reviewers who originally offered feedback on my energy research and social science article counter-argued that, quote, "One does not have to accuse capitalism to realize that the NGO here has obviously made elementary mistakes in the design of the project," end quote. Yet, I resist looking at the case of India's Sundarbans as an isolated incident resulting from some easily correctable mistakes. On the contrary, pointing to the bigger structures that confine certain types of work to the margins allows us to appreciate how the valuation of energy system reproduction cannot be left up to the initiative of individual organizations, individual NGOs. And that is because implementing agencies operate in an economic system that makes it difficult for them to value reproductive activities. Indeed, we live in an economic system characterized by an ideological separation between production and reproduction, by which only productive activities count as contributing to the gross domestic product, right? It is talked about as gross domestic product, not reproduct, although any product, anything that comes into the world needs to be reproduced for it not to fall apart, for it not to gather dust. In this economic system, the imperatives of economic growth and value maximization blind us to the injustices by which project implementers and manufacturers of electronics and solar PV modules profit from the sales of items they bring into the world, but do not bear the environmental and social cost of those items being in the world, falling apart, getting damaged, and requiring care. The NGOs certainly benefited from the project, from the solar mini grids, in terms of visibility and enhanced ability to attract further funding for new energy systems, at the expense of the community having to bear the cost of caring for existing energy systems. So, who is really contributing to sustainability here? In the Sundarbans today, sustainability is an obsolete fantasy. It becoming a reality requires a political commitment to redesigning the system of incentives that makes it possible or impossible for individual actors to sustain the work of operations and maintenance. The evaluation of this work as care work cannot take place, in other words, without fundamentally rethinking the rules of the system in which we live. In this case, without fundamentally rethinking what counts as contributing to the achievement of sustainable energy objectives. Thank you. And that would be it from my side for now.